All right, hello and welcome everybody. I have been looking forward to this event for quite a while now. It feels like it's been years since I've been thinking about getting a binder out there, and it's certainly been years in the making in terms of how much research has gone into making this happen. So I'm excited to share what I've learned with everyone here. So hello, first and foremost, to my mentors, to my friends, to my colleagues. I see many of you here in the chat, and I'm so excited to talk with you. All right, so here are the three things that I want to get done today. So I want to spend a few minutes. What are binders and how do they work? I want to give you a quick overview. There are misconceptions out there that I think harm people's ability to help their patients. I want to try to squash some of those the best I can. I want to talk about why I decided to put the time in to formulate a supplement. And I want to then give you my experience of how we can best use binders in clinical practice. So let's jump in. And I'm starting with a thank you. You're supposed to give the thank yous at the end of the presentation, but the honest truth is that I couldn't do this presentation and I couldn't have made this formula without a whole lot of help from everyone from Moss Nutrition, from my mentors, from Neil Nathan, from Jill Krista. I read both Neil and Jill's book back to front countless times. To everyone, many of the names in the chat that are here already, the papers you've shared in the listserv, and all my colleagues who've helped me understand how to help these patients. So wouldn't be here without you. And I see this as, my chance to run with the football for a little bit. And hopefully you guys can learn some things that will help you in your practice and go and take it farther from there. So here we go. All right. If you're here, I probably don't need to convince you that we live in an increasingly toxic world. Recently in the news, you hear kids' applesauce packages are coming with lead. I've seen a few cases now where patients are losing their hair from eating too much organic spinach from thallium toxicity. We are having, almost an outbreak of endocrine disrupting chemicals really trashing our health. Mold is a huge reason why I'm talking about this and why I made this binder. There's more mold than there was before, and this is not going to get better soon. We've got mold in our homes, our schools, and offices. And we're living in a plastic world. The average US adult is consuming about 800 pieces of microplastic a day. And I don't think these things are going to get better. So the short answer is that we need more tools to fight back. And I hope that this will help convince you that we've got a really good one in binders. So what are binders? Binders are things that travel through the GI tract and they interact with toxins. And the key thing to know here about binders is that they're not absorbed, right? These are mostly natural substances, but pharmaceuticals as well, that we travel through the GI tract to bind to toxins that are already in the GI tract, either from our food or toxins that have come into our GI tract from bile. So I'll spend a lot of time talking about the enterohepatic recirculation. And I think that that's a key piece that hasn't been discussed enough in the world of toxicity, mold toxicity, and metal toxicity. And that's one of the main targets that binders are going after. So binders are things that are not absorbed. They're not binding toxins in the connective tissue. They're not going through the bloodstream. They're working in the gut. And the big thing when you start reading scientific papers about binders is that they don't absorb toxins. They adsorb toxins. And what this means is that the binders themselves will hold toxins on the outer surface of their membrane. So we're looking generally at molecules that have a good ability to hold things on the outside at the end loosely. They're not traveling inside. And I've got a picture to share with you in just a moment. But I think this is really important because it helps us understand why some substances work as better binders than others. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce binders that will collect toxins on their outer membrane and then help excrete them in the stool. There are lots of ways that we can get toxins out in the body, right? The main ones are through the stool. You can urinate toxins out that are renally metabolized. The problem is we don't have very many good tools to upregulate that ability, right? We can use nutrients to build up glutathione stores, and we can supplement pathways. But in my experience, simply pulling things out is one of the more effective ways to detoxify. And so that's why I spent so much time talking about this here. So I think it's important. Most of the people here, practitioners, are used to using natural binders. So classically charcoal, chlorella, clay. But I just think it's important for those of us who prescribe to just remember that certain pharmaceuticals, cholestyramine, are also excellent binders. So let's move on to that image. So again, adsorption is on the outside. This is what binders are doing. They're collecting toxins on the outside surface for excretion in the stool. One of the consequences of binders grabbing toxins loosely on the outside surface, Neil Nathan teaches it like static cling, is that a lot of the toxins on binders can become associated with the binder itself. And as the binder travels through the GI tract, some of those toxins can travel off of the binder and then something else can come back on to adsorb onto the binder surface. I think that's one of the main reasons why we do get some side effects in some patients, right? Some patients, if you give too many binders, those toxins that are loosely associated with the binders will come off. And if you give too many binders, you mobilize too much toxin. So one of the principles that I'm going to teach you is how important it is to go low and slow with binders, because everybody's threshold for metabolizing those mobilized toxins is a little different. And so we have to be sensitive to that there's not a one size fits all protocol when it comes to binders. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm so happy to work with Moss Nutrition. I'll just say that right now, in that many of you are here because of the emails from Moss Nutrition. Moss Nutrition helped me formulate it. And one of the nice things about their company is that they only sell to practitioners. So this is ProBind Select will not be something that is sold to the general public. And I think that's critical for detoxification. I think this really needs to be done by experienced, smart practitioners, which hopefully at the end of the lecture, everybody will double up on their detoxification abilities. Okay, so a few years ago, when I started using binders, I saw that they started helping my most sick toxic patients. And it was enough of a signal that I really wanted to dive in more and say, what was it about binders that was finally making these mold and metal toxic patients better? And I just kind of became obsessed with the medical research here. And it turns out that there's levels of scientific evidence here that I think are sometimes grouped together. And what I really wanted to do when I approached this project of how could I make the best binder possible was to really prioritize the human clinical trials of binders, but also to make sure that we're prioritizing animal studies over mechanistic studies. So we need basic benchtop in vitro studies to prove a theory. We need to say, okay, we think it's plausible that this substance may bind this toxicant. A mechanistic study, an in vitro, a test tube study can prove, is that true? Yes or no? But that's not enough, right? So too many times in functional medicine, you'll see a company come out with a supplement and all they have is mechanistic evidence saying, you should do this because it will upregulate this genetic process or it will improve, this in vitro. That's not enough for clinical practice. I think we need to rely on better information when it's available. Happily, it's there for binders. I think more important than that mechanistic evidence is, does it work in a biologic system? Does it work in animals, right? You need that step, right? Will it improve outcomes in a variety of species? Then if so, you see that you get a yes, then you can move to the human trials. So wherever possible, I've tried to pull in that and rank the evidence. I will go to the overwhelming slide in just a moment, but I did see that my friend Scott is here on the call. And a few years ago, one of the things that got me started on this was Neil, Scott, Beth O'Hara, and I collaborated on trying to gather the evidence of what evidence was there for what binders for mold toxins. And secondarily, what evidence do we have of what genetic pathways are going to metabolize our binders? That really got me kick-started into this. And we came out with, I think, an awesome table. But the longer I looked at it and the more I dived into the research, I realized that all of the little check marks we had on that table kind of equated the mechanistic studies with the human trials. And I don't think they're equal. And I think we want to move it to the human trials wherever possible. So a few hundred articles later, too many hours to count, and you get the following chart. And I'm not going to go through this chart in detail. But I want to leave you with a couple points here. The green boxes are wherever we have human data showing that a binder is effective in a human system, in a human clinical trial. So when you hear opinions out there that binders are not clinically supported in the evidence, that opinion is wrong. There is tons of human trials. We'll go through some of them today. The purple boxes are animal studies, and the check marks are mechanistic studies showing that a binder would work in principle in an in vitro study. So the most studied binders are up at the top. So we have charcoal, which you can see from the column to the left in the first column, has the most. It gets the highest grade, right? But then you see chlorella is a high performer, bentonite clay probably coming in second, Saccharomyces, my buddy Lactobacillus plantarum, my absolute favorite probiotic, Rhamnosus, and Lactobacillus casei. So what you see here, what I hope you see is that a large variety of toxins are bound by a large variety of binders. And I think this is one of the take homes. The more I've done detoxification work with patients, the more I've appreciated the broad spectrum binders, how important they are. And we don't want to match one binder to one toxin. I think that's missing the ability to clear the body of a larger range of toxicants, right? So you see that not only are the substances here in ProBind going to bind mycotoxins, but they bind heavy metals, right? We know for a fact chlorella can improve outcomes, bind mercury, right? They bind plastics, they bind endocrine disruptors, they bind endotoxins. So we are finding out that charcoal binds endotoxins, those toxins endogenously produced by the bacterial species in our gut, as well as the exotoxins, all of the toxicants coming in. They bind carcinogens. And so when we're dealing with a toxic world, we want a broad spectrum binder. We don't want to just rely on one thing. So if you take home one thing from today, I hope it's that. Okay, here is another quite busy slide, and this is a summary of the enterohepatic recirculation. So I'll point your attention, try not to read the words, we'll go over that in a minute, but I'll point your attention to the green dots right above the liver to the left, and then the green dots in the pink GI tract. Those are my artistic rendering of toxicants coming into the body, right? So we breathe in mold toxins, we respire them into the lungs, you bring particulate matter in through the lungs, you bring endocrine disrupting chemicals in through the skin, right? You swallow heavy metals when you eat food and when you drink New Orleans water from lead pipes. And so all of those toxicants will get shuttled to the liver for the liver to undergo metabolism. And then the liver will want to excrete those toxins associated to bile. So you see the little yellow taxi cabs, right? That's a molecule of bile, right? And bile not only breaks down the fats, helps us digest our food, but it also binds onto toxins. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. If it were just a one-way trip out, we wouldn't be having this huge explosion of toxicant-related diseases. But problematically, bile is hard to make in the body, right? So it's expensive metabolically to make bile. It's hard to do. It costs a lot. And so what the body does is it reabsorbs 95% of the bile back in, and it brings the toxins right back to the liver and starts the process again. This is the enterohepatic recirculation. This is the main thing we want to disrupt for our patients who have accumulated toxic burdens. We want to slowly filter the bile of toxins, right? And so what you'll see is that little yellow taxi cab going back and shunted to the liver, right? Okay, so I will read the quote here because I think it makes sense. And all the quotes here, the relevant medical literature is on the bottom for those of you who like going to the source material. So after hepatic processing, deliver of the toxicants into the bile accounts for much elimination, but unfortunately, it's returned to the liver through the EHC. Consequently, the cycle of excretion and reabsorption commences over and over again. I'm going to make the argument that this is the primary target that many practitioners are missing when they give binders on an empty stomach. It is my perspective that we are best served by giving binders with a fatty meal at lunch, primarily to take into account if you want to get the bile efflux into the GI tract so that when you bring the binder into the GI tract, you've got a higher chance to pick off some of that toxin and the bile. All right, so the Pro and ProBind Select stands for probiotics. And the beautiful thing about probiotics is they do almost everything. There's a reason why it's very hard to leave my clinical practice without being on probiotics. And probiotics in this setting are one of the best tools that we have to disrupt that recirculation. So we know that specific probiotics, specific lactobacillus and specific Saccharomyces will increase how much bile acids the body is making. It will increase the bile flow. It increases the glutathione, and then it increases the amount of bile acids that are excreted, the amount that are not reabsorbed. So probiotics, I will make the case, are really underappreciated when it comes to detoxifying our patients. Not only do they directly bind toxins like you saw in that chart, right? Not only do they directly bind plastics, not only they directly bind metals, but they are upregulating this bile pathway to get the toxins out. So I have patients, we'll talk in more detail, but I typically have patients before they start binders, start probiotics morning and night, and then use binders with the meal in the middle of the day. And there was a time when I was just jumping right to binders in my clinical practice. And patients slowly got better, but I saw a lot of people would react to the binders. And we'll talk about this in detail. But clinically, there then was a time where I didn't see as many mold toxic patients, and I was seeing a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, and SIBO. So those patients got a whole lot of probiotics, that twice a day broad spectrum pattern. A few of those patients then moved into a moldy house and got sick as hell. And I noticed that they got better so much quicker. I was like, oh, that was easy. They get on the binders and then I give them nystatin and some of them needed MCAS support, but then, 4 to 6 months later, they're back. And I hadn't seen that before. And I think the missing link was the fact that I had pre-treated them with probiotics. That's since become a major part of my clinical practice. Okay. What I want to do is go through, I'm not going to go through every binder in detail, but I want to give a little shout out to each of the binders that I think are the best substantiated in the clinical literature. And it's not going to be a deep dive into how each binder works for what substance, because we would be here forever, all night. But I want to give a quick shout out and quickly go through these. Okay, so charcoal, we know, is efficacious against the mycotoxin trichothecene. And we see the structure of charcoal. It's a little bit different than some of the other binders, although it does only adsorb these toxins. You can see the little orange dots. It has such an interesting 3D structure that they can kind of go into a little pit and valley and then adsorb into the outer surface. Charcoal is the single best binder, and if I could only choose one, it would be charcoal. And we see in a really neat animal study, toxin-laden rats survived longer if you give them charcoal. Okay, that's good stuff. We want to know that. If you only poison them with mycotoxins, their spleen, their thymus, their stomach, their small intestine, their liver, and their adrenal glands melt away. They become necrotic, right? And this effect is prevented when these rats were protected with charcoal. So a good sign that charcoal is doing something. I wanna shout out chlorella, and I want to shout out chlorella for a couple ways. Number one, I want to point to the cell wall. So chlorella is a really interesting organism, and it has a very special cell wall. The peptidoglycans on chlorella make it very, very effective at binding to toxicants. And so in this case, on the left side, you see a study describing how those outer cell wall binds to the metal cadmium. Cadmium is horribly dangerous metal. You see it not just in smokers. It used to be that if you see it in the blood, you're like, oh, that person's a smoker. I am seeing it more and more in non-smokers. I think that the exposure that we are having to heavy metals globally is on the rise. Air pollution, water pollution, in our food supply, and the products that we use and put on our bodies. Okay, well, let's see. We also know that chlorella works for aflatoxin. So aflatoxin is the single most studied mycotoxin. We know that it is associated with liver cancer. And we know that chlorella can help prevent it, right? So we find it helpful in a lot of ways. Okay, clay. So this is a picture of bentonite clay. And bentonite clay works differently than zeolite clay. So maybe I'll talk about zeolite clay in a moment. But suffice it to say that the structure of bentonite clay is very physically different than the structure of other clays, particularly zeolite. And it's that structure of bentonite clay that makes it work better. So we have lots of head-to-head studies, what binders work best for what mycotoxin. And in those studies, it's very clear that bentonite clay outperforms zeolite. And so you see that it's partly due to the physical structure of the clay itself. All right, here's the first human trial that we'll talk about. Okay, so this is done in 234 Texans, right? So I practice medicine in New Orleans, and I'm licensed in Louisiana and Texas. So I see a fair amount of Texans virtually. And so this study really piqued my interest. These were workers who were being exposed to aflatoxin B1, and they were treated with bentonite clay. And what we learned, a couple interesting things in this study. Number one, it worked. So bentonite clay was safe and it was effective at lowering markers of aflatoxin exposure, in this case, urine and blood markers. And the important thing, I think the clinical pearl that we should get is that the low dose here was more effective than the high dose. Could you imagine that, right? You know, all those Texans, bigger is better, right? More is better. But as our friend Dr. Neil Nathan would remind us, that more is not always better, right? So sometimes we underappreciate how far low doses of the right substances can go. So I found that particularly interesting. I wanted to give a close up, a little high five to our friend yeast Saccharomyces. And the interesting thing about yeast species is that it again helps us understand the effect of the cell wall. So the bigger the cell wall, the better the adsorption was for mycotoxins. All right, so probiotics are already my favorite treatment, top to bottom, and this paper just made me so happy, right? So the title of this paper at the bottom, could probiotics protect against human toxicity caused by polystyrene nanoplastics and microplastics? And the answer, if you read this amazing paper, is absolutely yes, 100%. And I've come to look at them as binder all-stars. So what we learn here is that I'm just going to read it. The introduction of probiotic bacteria, including the lactobacillus strains, into the GI tract can eliminate or decrease the toxic effect of heavy metals or toxic fungi. All right. If you're not giving probiotics to your patients with metal or mold, you need to start, right? Bacterial molecules like mannan oligosaccharides or peptidoglycans present in the cell wall of these organisms can enable the cells to bind to the toxins. All right, got it. Some probiotic bacteria and yeast, including Rhamnosus, Plantarum, and Saccharomyces, are able to absorb various heavy metals like lead, cadmium, copper, mercury. Probiotics also bind to molecules and toxins like benzoapyrene, mycotoxins, BPA, and phthalates. BPA, phthalates, mycotoxin, benzoapyrene, mercury, cadmium, copper. Come on, it's just really clear. And whenever you have a clinical treatment that fixes a lot of things like probiotics does, then usually there's a lot going on with it. So we know probiotics have the ability to lower A1C in diabetics. We know it improves anxiety and depression in those with depression. We know it helps chronic fatigue. We know it lowers blood pressure. It lowers lipids. Obviously, it can cure SIBO. We see it cure dysbiosis all the time. It decreases bloating, abdominal pain. Whenever you have a treatment that is that widely effective, I've seen rosacea go away, skin improve, and I know that those listening have had similar experiences. Then the probiotic is probably doing something more than just hanging out in the gut. And I think the ability of the probiotic to bind such a wide variety of toxicants is the main reason why it has all of those positive clinical effects. Okay, so this is ProBind Select. This is the culmination of a lot of work and a lot of thinking. And thank you so much to Moss Nutrition for helping me do this. This would not have been possible without Joanne and Jeff Moss, Nick Hedberg, Diana Allen. The list of all the people at Moss Nutrition who've helped this happen is huge. And I'm so grateful to work with them. Let me just say about Moss. So Moss sells to practitioners. They don't sell directly to the public. So if you are interested in using ProBind Select as a practitioner, you register with Moss, right? So you can make an account through their website. You can call their number and talk to one of the wonderful folks over there. And I decided to use Moss Nutrition to formulate this because, frankly, I've used their products for 10 years and they've gained my trust as a company who cares. They'll answer the phone when my patients have a problem. They are deeply, deeply committed to putting evidence-based formulas out, and just over almost a decade of clinical practice, their products work. They make great stuff. So I can't say enough good things about Moss, and I wouldn't have been able to make this if it weren't for them. So what's in it? So ProBind Select is charcoal, clay, chlorella, and Saccharomyces at a 400 milligram dose of each per 4 capsules. All right. I really, really pushed hard for the feng shui of even numbers. So that means 100 milligrams of each of those main ingredients is in 1 capsule. Okay. It also includes probiotics. This is the only combination binder on the market that puts those specific species that bind a wide variety of toxicants in with the other broad spectrum binders. So we get the clay, the charcoal, the chlorella, and then our friends, the probiotics. The probiotics do a lot of work in the formula. They help regulate the stools. If you give charcoal clay, occasionally it will cause a little slowing of the stools, a little constipation. The probiotics prevent much of that, right? They help promote the regularity of the bowels, and they really, really help make it work better. Okay. Over the years, I've used binders in a lot of patients in across the world and patients all over the place. And after treating a lot of patients with toxicity, I really became convinced that broad spectrum binders worked better than single agents. But time and time again, I was running up against the problem of saying, okay, take a little charcoal and a little chlorella and a little clay, and then here are the probiotics. And patients just couldn't cope with that. Those of you who are treating mold toxic patients in particular are aware of how much brain fog, depression, cognitive impairment, and frank psychiatric problems are present, right? These patients can't tolerate complicated programs. And so they simply just weren't able to hang. Or maybe they do it for a month, but then they'd forget to order the chlorella and then they would forget the dosing. And it was a nightmare. And since I've introduced Provine into my practice, a lot of people are fessing up. Hey, Dr. Joe, I actually wasn't really taking it how you told me to. So, you always got to be careful of those patients, right? They tell you what they think you want to hear, so you really got to grill them sometimes. Okay, so I made this because I wanted all the things I knew worked the best in a single bottle, right? The other combination binders, there are some good ones on the market, right? Quicksilver's IMD, that's helped my patients, right? I like that, but most of the products out there, they just contain ingredients that I was not seeing in the clinical literature. Or I was seeing in the clinical literature like zeolite not work as well as bentonite clay. And so I'm like, if you could use zeolite or bentonite, you choose bentonite clay all day long. I was finding things like humic and fulvic acid that people would react to. I would find not very much evidence on silica. When I would see it quoted, it would just be a mechanistic study, no animal study, no clinical trial data. I used to use modified citrus pectin, and I know maybe some of the practitioners here still use it. I found that my patients react to it often. And when I poked through the study, hat tip to Dr. Lynn Patrick, when I poked through the actual study, the science doesn't hold up. There's some methodological problems with the study that made me really reconsider it, especially because my patients reacted to it. So I wanted to be able to control exactly how much was in my binder, and I wanted to control the ingredients. And I wanted my patients to know exactly what was in it, right? If you give one capsule, this is how much of each of the ingredients you're going to get. Because a lot of companies are moving towards proprietary blends where they don't have to tell you how much of each ingredient is in their product. And I just think this is unacceptable, especially for our most sensitive patients. They react to a lot of things. We need to know what we're giving our patients. And so I just feel very strongly that I tell patients to this day, if a supplement has a proprietary blend on it, you should assume the worst, right? You should be very skeptical. Frankly, there's a profit incentive for a company to put the cheaper ingredients in at a higher quantity and put the more expensive ingredients toward the bottom of the list, right? They don't have to tell you. It could be 99% junk ingredients and 1% good. They don't have to tell you. I also wanted a way to give low dose binders. So 4 capsules is a serving size for a healthy adult, but I can give a quarter dose for my pediatric patients. I can start my most sensitive patients on a single quarter dose and then have them work up as tolerated. I think that's so key to those of us who are in this field is to understand that we have different sensitivities for our patients, right? And that we want to be able to customize how much we're giving. Okay, so again, we went through this. Here's the chart again, just for a review. We'll just blow through this. I want to get right to the clinical goodness. Okay, so here are my opinions. Okay, so I know this is different than some people's practice, and I'll just say if we all had the same opinion, medicine wouldn't be very much fun. So this is my experience based on my patients, based on my own experience of being sick with mold. And this is how I do things. So not saying it's the right, I'm not saying it's the best way necessarily. We all see different patients, but this is what I do. I pre-treat before I give binders. And before I do anything, I get on a soapbox and I talk about removing exposure to the toxicant. And it doesn't matter what the toxicant is, if it's a metal, if it's a plastic, if it's BPA, if it's glyphosate, if it's aflatoxin, if it's ochratoxin, you have to work with the patient to lower the exposure, to remove them from the environment, to remediate, to move, to find what they're reacting to. It's just the first principle of environmental medicine is to remove exposure. And if you don't constantly harp on that, you're going to miss patients who you could have helped. What you don't want to do is jump right to supplement land and they're still living in a moldy place. Now, patients don't need to have zero mold to heal. This is repeated a lot. I see a lot of patients that they lower the mold in their house and they get better. They still have mold there, but they're better. And so I think it's you don't have to be perfect, and the all or nothing approach I hear from a lot of patients, I hope that goes away. Okay, so I get on my soapbox a lot and I spend a lot of time trying to help them remove exposure. I have a master's in public health, and I'd be doing a very bad job to my university if I didn't harp on this principle of environmental medicine. Okay, so binders, I also say binders don't work if you're constipated. Binders are meant to be pooped out. You are taking charcoal into your body, so you poop it out. If you're constipated, don't take binders. Period. The end. And I always make sure that they're having regular bowel movements prior to starting binders. Doesn't have to be every other day. Some people are on very low fiber, low FODMAP diets. Some people are using elemental diets or carnivore, and they're pooping every other day regularly. So it's not that they have to poop every day if their fiber is that much lower, but it's got to be regular. Okay, so that's pre-treatment number one. And maybe I should have talked about this before, but I treat patients who usually have seen a half dozen practitioners of a variety of sorts before coming into my office, and they're usually quite sick. And I know that probably speaks for a lot of a lot of practitioners on this call, but I think it's important that different practitioners see different patients. And I wanted to share my experience. And how I see it is 25% of patients feel better quickly on binders. They're treating a root cause. They're being made, their inflammation is coming from exposure to toxins. You're helping excrete the toxin. Inflammation's coming down. They feel better, right? MCAS downregulates. Their limbic system feels better. Their gut works better. Their liver is able to detoxify the other things, right? Everything works. And that tells you that you've treated the right patient with the right substance at the right time. They feel better. They were ready for binders. And we have a party. 50% of patients don't feel any different. And that's okay, right? I didn't check to see if Dr. Nathan had made it to the call, but I promise you he would agree with this. My experience is that even if patients aren't immediately improving on binders, in the long run, they will begin to make progress when they hadn't before, even if it's slow. So low and slow toxin removal, that slow filtration of the binder is perfectly acceptable. A quarter of patients feel worse, okay? And that's just the reality, right? We don't want to pretend that binders are 100% effective on every patient or you missed the mark. It's like this for any medication, right? Some people will have a side effect. When patients feel worse on binders, you gave them too much or you didn't do a good enough job preparing them. And I just think it's so important and worth repeating over and over again. How much of my day is spent telling people to slow down, right? Those of you who are dealing with chronically ill, complicated, toxicant patients, I'm sure are laughing and saying, "Yeah, I hear you, Joe." But that's just the way it is. And I wanted to just say that explicitly. All right. Different patients need different doses. And I made ProBind, so a serving is 4 capsules, and I did that so we can give different patients different doses. Our most sensitive patients, I give a single capsule taken with lunch. And I have them increase by 1 capsule every week as tolerated, up to 4 capsules daily. So yes, it will take them a month to get to the full adult dose. Some patients top out at 2 capsules. I'm one of those patients, right? I feel the best on a low to moderate dose of binders, and I've always been that way. When I push it higher, I feel junky. All the mold symptoms come back, and so I know I pushed it too hard, and I got to go back down. It's just the way it is, right? And so 1 capsule will do work. 1 capsule taken daily over many months will bring toxins down. I've seen it many times. It's effective. Stronger patients, I start right at 2 capsules. And then if they feel fine, I have them bump right up to 4 capsules daily, taken with lunch. And you get that with clinical experience. Who's ready? You'll constantly tell people to slow down. A little goes a long way. And man, I wish I made that third binder a full slide. Never, 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 never push through side effects. It's a sign that the body's trying to say stop. The body's saying, this is not what I need. The body's saying you're doing too much. We don't herx through things. We don't push through negative symptoms. It's never green on that other side. And I feel so strongly about that. Every single time people want to do this, you have to talk them out of it because they've been conditioned and told this. You got to push through whatever diet. If one didn't work, then take two. It's not how you detoxify. It's the body. You have to honor the patient's body and their response and what they're ready for. So we never push through. If there's maybe one thing that I hope you take away, I hope that lands. This is how I give binders. And again, I'm sorry for a little bit of a crowded slide, but my general rule is to take supplements morning and night. So supplements, and I'll say medicines. So maybe they're on Armour thyroid and a blood pressure medicine and probiotics, in the morning, and maybe they're on melatonin and probiotics and magnesium in the evening, just as an example. I think 2 a day cadence of supplements is the general rule. I think long and hard before I ask a patient to take something 3 times a day. Okay. This comes as a consequence of working with people who have been hurt by integrative medicine, they come in with these spreadsheets. Everyone here has seen this with spreadsheets, and there's 20 supplements, and they're taking supplements 7 times a day, and they've been traumatized by the integrative medical system. And I think we have to acknowledge that more is not better. And every single time a sick person takes a medicine or a supplement, it's a reminder that they're sick. That keeps them sick a lot of times. So we as healers need to be aware of this, and we need to be judicious of when we give things, how we present materials to patients, how often and how aggressively we treat what patients. So although that's the rule, 2 a day, is where I want most of my patients to be. The exception comes from my toxic patients. They need binders. Binders can bind pharmaceuticals. Binders can bind supplements. So you don't want to give them with your other supplements, right? You want to take it with lunch. So binders, I think, get their own little special place right with lunch. You want that upregulated bile. You want the meal to trigger the CCK to dump the bile so that you can grab the toxin-laden bile and the toxins on the bile and help excrete it out. I just put colistin and colesevelam in there because I use those a lot in clinical practice, and I designed ProBind so that it can be used with those medications. So those of you who have prescriptive rights, I intend for ProBind to be used with lunch with cholestyramine or Welchol, Cholestipol if they're on it. Okay, here's a general rule, a general thought of how I like to pre-treat before binders. 4 weeks before binders, weeks 4, weeks 3, weeks before binders, hammering the lifestyle. Are they on the right diet? Are they sleeping? Are they taking things they don't need? Are they pooping regularly? Do they need more hydration? These are the basics, and everybody's patient population will need slightly different things based on what you're used to seeing. Some people have more OBGYN hormone-based practices. Some people see more of a psych practice. Some people do more nutrition. So you use your tools and your scope of practice for maybe 3 to 4 weeks before binders. 1 to 2 weeks, broad spectrum probiotics twice daily. I use Probiotics Select, Saccharomyces, and Bacillospore Select, typically given twice daily, right? So most of my patients are on 1 capsule of each twice daily. Many of my patients are on 2 capsules twice daily. And so you may say, Dr. Joe, you're giving Saccharomyces and Lactobacillus and Probiotics Select 3 times a day? Yes. Dr. Joe, if I give ProBind Select, does that mean I can stop my probiotics? No. The more the merrier. I like that. I'm sure that's a question. Okay. I will leave this here. I won't read through this. This is my instructions for patients, and this lecture will be available online at a later time. It'll be on my YouTube, and it'll also be distributed through Moss Nutrition. And so I will leave this text alone for now, but I just wanted to give how I present binders to patients, to practitioners. Maybe if you're not as familiar with this, I think this may be helpful. There are probably several dentists here. I was just speaking to my friends at Enlighten Dental here in New Orleans this morning, and I gave them a version of this slide, which is a mercury amalgam protocol. When even the best biologic dentists, when you remove mercury amalgams, are going to mobilize mercury in the system. And so what I like to do is recommend patients take selenium. And if you are a Moss nutrition practitioner and you haven't read Dr. Moss's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful reviews on selenium and mercury toxicity, please do. Selenium, N-acetylcysteine before, and then ProBind working the dose up from 2 to 4 before the procedure, And then for the next 3 weeks after having the mercury amalgams out, I think you should stay on these substances, the N-acetylcysteine to upregulate your body's ability to make glutathione if it needs it. I don't recommend giving straight glutathione because it makes so many people sick, and I don't find it's needed clinically. For those dentists who are doing mercury removal by quadrant, then I would simply have them stay on the selenium, N-acetylcysteine, and Provine until all of those are gone. I think there is a role, given that first slide of how many toxicants we're exposed to consider using a general detoxification pattern in a daily life as a preventative. And this is what I plan to move to personally is kind of a 1 month on, 1 month off. I have used binders myself for a very long time on a regular basis, and I've treated patients who've been on them for decades. I think they're safe to be given long term, and I think there's a slide coming up. But I wanted to give just a general protocol for people who may come into a practitioner and they're healthy and they want to know what can they do to just maybe do a month of detox. This is what I recommend. And so BID multi-select is a Moss Nutrition multivitamin. N-acetylcysteine, talked about. Green tea, our former friend and colleague Beth O'Hara, one of the best things she taught me was that mold toxins are largely metabolized not through methylation, but through glucuronidation. And the polyphenols in green tea actually are some of the most potent enablers of that detoxification. So I also happen to be a green tea fiend, and I recommend getting some fresh, nice loose leaf green tea. It's so much better. The bags have plastic in it. Don't use tea bags. Epsom salt bath, if your patients can tolerate it. Sauna, if they have access to it. Provine Select with lunch. All right. Is it safe to use binders on an ongoing basis? So one of the things you'll hear is that you can't give binders because it's going to bind your nutrients. It's going to bind your magnesium. It's going to make you deficient. This is not true. And I can say that confidently because we have clinical data that shows short-term trials, no issues with nutrient malabsorption. So they studied this in a huge, well-done trial of Novosil clay, which is bentonite clay in Ghana. There's actually a three-part study. If you the link, the trial listing is below. Highly recommend read that for anybody who wants to learn more about some of the human trials. Those of us who've been doing it the longest have had people on binders for a really long time, and we don't find deficiencies. And so, Jill, if you disagree, you can yell at me. Neil, if you're here and you disagree, I know you don't disagree, but we just don't see it clinically happen. For long-term use, I plan to use about 2 capsules daily. And my general advice for all supplements, and I'll include binders in it, is stop everything every 3 months. And I know this may be a little counterintuitive, but one of the reasons people are sick is that they're taking too much stuff. Their cellular pathways become really clogged up, right? There's just too much nutrients. They get overwhelmed. They get overmethylated. They become sick. They get GI symptoms just from too many supplements. And so even the things that we believe to be helping, I think we should stop every 3 months to get that objective. Do I feel worse off of this? Do I feel better on it? That's what you're looking for a supplement to really show us that it's helping us. All right. Not everybody's ready for binders. All right. The first red quote is a patient told me this on visit one. I hadn't given her binders yet, but she had been given binders by another practitioner. And I'm sure you've heard this before. I took charcoal for 3 or 4 days. I'm feeling terrible. Headache, my stomach was upset, weird buzzing feelings. All right, this person mobilized more toxins than they were ready for. This is classic. It happens often. You just need to look out for it. This one came from a note today, actually. Put a patient on probiotics, then Provine Select. I'm feeling so much better. So started off on one, felt so much better. Two was like, I'm not sure if this is it. I felt like I could smell and taste mold. And after about 4 days, I couldn't put it together till I tried three. Then he started feeling like he was back in the mold, right? So again, we've mobilized more toxins than this gentleman could handle. He went back to two and still felt a little off, probably because he had pushed it too hard at three. So I told him, stay at one. I'm going to see him in November. This is October 2024 for posterity. And I'll see him in November. I said, just stay on one. Stay on 1 capsule of Provine with lunch. And he feels better on that dose. And I think that will be the sweet spot for this gentleman for now. We can always go up later. What to do if someone reacts? Okay, you either have them cut the dose, either cut the dose in half, use your judgment, or have them stop completely, right? the worse the side effect, the more likely you just need to stop it. And this should always be a reminder to go back to that first principle of environmental medicine. Drop the exposure, right? Are they still living in mold? The people who are still living in mold react all the time to binders. It's very similar to those of you who give your patients glutathione. When a patient is given a single dose of glutathione and they crash, that's toxins, right? You just see this pattern again and again and again. Toxin exposure is a major reason why people are reacting to it. It's just too much for them. Sometimes they need a supplement detox. They need to simplify their supplements. Sometimes you've missed a piece on their lifestyle. I found a couple patients who reacted to binders. I found sleep apnea. I fixed the sleep apnea either through mouthpiece, nose, the nasal dilator, or CPAP. Then they could tolerate binders. Sometimes they need MCAS support. That's maybe a lecture all of itself, or often they have limbic dysregulation. So something here is off and you need to do your due diligence and fix that before trying again. I generally use binders in a mold case for 6 to 18 months. And generally speaking, when there's a heavy metal toxicity, 3 to 9 months. This, I think, is a moving target. And I think as we get more experience with combination binders, we're going to get better at predicting how long to use these things. I don't treat until my patient has a negative urinary mycotoxin test when it comes to mold. I don't find that's needed. I find people are better well before that point, and that's something I feel pretty strongly about. I generally find from looking at lots and lots of urinary mycotoxin tests that binders will slowly drop those real-time lab or mosaic labs about 5% a month. Some higher, some lower. But if you take the big picture and just look at the graph, that's usually what it does. My experience clinically is that if you add up all the mycotoxins on the real-time lab and you get a 15, when you drop that to 7.5, 50% reduction, maybe 5, when you significantly get it down, that's when people are really turning the corner. And I think that that's a reasonable goal, is to get 50% reduction. Ultimately, we want to treat until their symptoms are better. We don't need to be afraid of keeping patients on binders, but we also don't want to have our patients feel like they need treatment forever if they might not. Metals typically come out quicker in my experience. I treat until, depending on the symptoms and depending on what metal was high, I generally treat until there's nothing detectable in the blood. And that's particularly true for mercury and lead, cadmium, or until their urinary levels. I use doctor's data, random urinary test, and I have the NHANES database kind of up handy. And I treat until the levels are 50%, the 50% population of the NHANES level. Okay. Treating these patients is hard. Okay. This talk is mostly to practitioners. And so I want this to be a warning and hopefully incentivize you to work with these patients because they'll be the most rewarding patients you ever treat. But it's not easy. And if you go into it thinking it's easy, you're going to get burned, right? Those of us treating chronic illness, and especially those of us treating mold, metal, and toxicant exposures, we're really at the forefront, I think, of this type of medicine. And we don't have all the answers. And because of that, we're going to make mistakes. We're always going to be learning and getting better and better and better. But if you want easy medicine, then go treat strep throat in urgent care. Penicillin will knock it out. But I want to end on a case study, just showing you how rewarding it can be and how it doesn't have to be that hard. Okay, so this young man is John Michael. He came to see me when he was 21 months old here at my practice in New Orleans. And they had such a hard time. I mean, you can just look at this picture and your heart breaks for this little kid. He is not living any sort of life that any of us want for any of our family. And so this kid had head to toe eczema. He was eating 5 foods. They were injecting him with EpiPens regularly, weekly, because of intense food reactions. Antihistamines, steroids, nothing helped. He was really hurting and they didn't know where to go. They came in to see me. And I gave him probiotics, clay, charcoal, and chlorella. And this is what happened 4 weeks later. And I gave him one new food, right? And after that, he turned the corner. This is what functional medicine is. When you treat the right problem with the right tool, the patient gets better. So this kid, 4 weeks later, he's a new kid, right? He has hugely expanded his diet. And remember, This is probiotics, and this is small doses of clay, charcoal, and chlorella. I didn't have ProBind at that time, but I would have given him a half capsule or one capsule, worked his way up to one capsule, mixed in some food or some liquid. His stools completely normalized. He had diminished food reactions, and he was still being exposed to mold, right? So it was in the process of ripping out the floors. They found mold all underneath the floors. He also had arsenic from well water, but it doesn't have to always be hard. Probiotics and binders. And he kept getting better. So he started growing out his hair. He started catching up on the growth chart, right? No anaphylaxis. He expanded his diet. He started sleeping through the night, no eczema, dropped a whole bunch of medicines. His heavy metal levels were coming down. And by this point, we had worked him up to probiotics, binders, oral nystatin, and a nose spray. And that's what he needed to heal, right? And so I just want to give you encouragement that if you do this kind of work and you're doing things step by step, slowly, but being aware of how important these toxins can be, you're going to get results like this. And there's nothing better, right, than getting an email a few years later, John Michael, right? So this was, I think he was what, 14 months, I don't know, whatever. He's 4. He's super healthy. He's strong. He got that curly hair, right? He's living his life. And so I want to encourage you that you can get those results if you work hard with your patients. And with that, I'm going to pause the slideshow and we'll switch over to Q&A. All right, as soon as I figure out how to do that. Okay, let's see. All right, so I will start with the earliest comment and I will go down. All right, probiotics, yep, love it. A good reference for your info. Noah, I tried to put all of my references in each slide at the bottom. If anything in the presentation you want to reference, email me. It's office@drmather.com. And I will be happy to share with you my research. Okay, why is ProBind with Saccharomyces boulardii and not Cerevisiae? Okay, so Kadeha, so 2 reasons. Saccharomyces boulardii is infinitely easier to get our hands on than Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So that is a practical reason. And the other reason is that they are so similar. I don't think that there's any important clinical difference in how these work. I've used them both. And I just think they work the same. I don't have the study on hand, but I did find a really fascinating study that showed that biochemically, one might make a little bit higher percent of different polyphenols and one cell wall might be a little different, but I just couldn't bring myself to make that a big deal. So I don't think it matters. Don't the binders bind the probiotics and the nutrients in your meal? So no, they don't. And the reason why is that you have to remember that when these substances hit the stomach acid, the probiotics, 99% of them get lysed anyway. So they become little cell walls anyways. And so there's kind of this idea in integrative medicine that live probiotics are populating the gut when that rarely happens. It's not that they're colonizing. Most of them lack adhesion molecules to actually imprint themselves in the gut, and they're dead fragments by the time they get into the gut. The way they're working is by an antimicrobial action. They secrete compounds that kill dysbiosis. They work by binding toxins. Number 2, I think we covered that. And number 3, they impact our immune system, right? So it's those 3 mechanisms that are most important. We really don't care if they're live or dead. There are some difference of opinion. Hey, Scott, I'm seeing your question. There are some differences of opinion among experts on using SACB in mold illness. Do you have some scenarios where you would avoid using the formula as a result? Okay, yeah. So occasionally patients will react to Saccharomyces boulardii. It is rare. There are a couple patients who are reactive to Saccharomyces boulardii, but what I didn't want to do is not put one of the best studied binders in a formula that I think is going to help 95% of people. I had a patient last week with big time candida overgrowth who is significantly better. And I tried putting her on the triple probiotic regimen that I often use, the lactobacillus, the Saccharomyces, and the bacillospore. And she just found that every single time that we used the Saccharomyces that she fell off. And I think there's some link between those patients who have extreme candida overgrowth. And so I would probably, so for her, she got so much better on nystatin. She's, I think, 2 weeks in. I'm going to treat her with nystatin for a month. And if I feel like there's more to gain by adding Saccharomyces, then we'll add it. But I don't think it's so important that you have to use it. Some do caution around bentonite clay as it is often contaminated with heavy metals. Do we have COAs for this binder to show metal content? So I don't have the COA, but what I learned when going through this is that all bentonite clay, all charcoal, all chlorella, all probiotics. I actually was looking at a COA from a probiotics that showed a little bit of cadmium in it. And this was so I think the reality is that all of these substances have some metals in them. And I think that's okay because they're supposed to, right? They're supposed to bind to metals. So if they are in an environment with a little bit of cadmium or lead on it, that's okay because the net effect is a huge efflux out. So I wouldn't have made this product if I didn't see time and time again that giving people high doses of clay and charcoal and chlorella dropped their blood lead level. And so that's what I see clinically. And so I guess I would say all of these materials have some heavy metals in them, but you are doing way more good in terms of giving them the materials that actually improve these and have outcomes related to them. Any ingredients in binder that support removal of PFAS? Yes. And probiotics are the main stars here. Is the chlorella glass grown? I don't remember, but I don't think so. You highlighted Saccharomyces as a binder. Does that mean kombucha is a binder? A little. Kombucha is a baby binder. I have patients who try to use kombucha and kimchi and sauerkraut to fix their gut, and it never works, right? It's not that those things are bad; they're good for you, right? But at least in my patients, they tend to get really histamine if they use too much of that. And I think the reality is that you can't get the dose high enough of the Saccharomyces and the species in the kombucha. But I did make kombucha with Saccharomyces and using Probiotics Select and Saccharomyces boulardii from Moss once, and it was delicious. I haven't done it in a while. Silicone dioxide can be a trigger for sensitive MCAS patients. I agree, and that's why it's not in the binder. Have you seen intolerance to the products in ultra-sensitive patients? So the binder just came out, but I've had results now of about a dozen hypersensitive patients. The answer is no. And a lot of that has to do with the low dose. A lot of it has to do with using it with food. And three, the ingredients that we put in this are excellent. And I've been using combination binders in this way for a long time, but they had to do it in a way that was a pain in the butt, right? So a little bit of charcoal, a little bit of clay. And I had to have most of my even hypersensitive limbic MCAS patients do just a little dose of everything, and they tolerate it just fine most of the time. The same rules apply. If they're reacting to the substances, they either need more MCAS support, more limbic work, they're missing exposure, you haven't done enough to fix the gut, they're not sleeping. And I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to get really micromanaging on the binders and say it's this one and not this one because we lose our patients. We need them to take broad spectrum binders regularly, slowly, carefully, listen to their symptoms. But when you let them get hung up on, I reacted to this and I ate this and I reacted to this, you get lost. And so that's my opinion on the trigger. So this has worked fine in my most sensitive patients, and I designed it for my most sensitive patients with one capsule. Top three Moss products I could not live without in my clinical practice. Frankly, it's the three probiotics. Probiotics Select, Saccharomyces, and Bacillospore. That helps so many of my patients. I treat a ton of patients with gut. I treat a ton of patients with toxicity. And this is a foundational treatment in my practice. And so I would rank that even over ProBind because they do so much. So maybe there are other things that do so many other things. Like I love HPA Select for my patients. Colon Select is an awesome laxative. GI Select is great for my patients with inflammatory bowel diseases. So many all-stars, but because if you looked at the things that my patients were getting from Moss, those three would stand out. Where do I stand on the theoretical concern that chlorella daily binds other minerals and fatty vitamins? I think I went over that enough. Clinical trials show that they do not. Vitamin A, E, C, and D levels were unchanged post binders. Hey, Taft, you ask, is testing always needed? I think you gave me a layup, buddy, because you know my answer. All right, so I don't always test my patients. I see patients who are financially strapped many times, who have I'll just say wasted $2,000 to $6,000 on functional medicine testing. And I say wasted because they're not better. They're seeing me after seeing 4 to 5 doctors who were taking a testing only approach. They were kind of looking at the red things, and that overload of information slows people down. And so it's not that I don't test, I do test, but when you've seen as many mold toxic patients as I have, I think that there's something to be said to just getting them feeling better. monitoring their symptoms. I give you this. Did it help you? Yes or no? If no, what's the next tool I need? Just step by step, one treatment at a time. Because there's so many things that help these patients, so much lifestyle work that needs to be done, so many helpful supplements, right? That so many medications. It just there's so many tools that my strong feeling is that as a field, we should back away from testing and really, really prioritize symptom relief. Are the tools that we're giving, are they evidence-based that have shown that they improve outcomes, and then are they helping the patient in front of me? Okay, say more about humic and fulvic acids, which are binders that are absorbed. I can't say too much about them, James, because I just couldn't find much evidence about them, and my patients reacted to them whenever I've tried them. So that there may be some piece that I'm missing, but just after you try something a bunch of times and it consistently makes your patients worse, and then when you see all the well done research and humic and fulvic acid isn't there, that's the reason why I don't focus on it. I feel better that binders aren't absorbed. Frankly, I like that they stay in the gut. I know that they can stay there and get out. They're not going to mess up things. Is it okay to split the dose between two meals? Yes, it is. Okay. There is a video out there by a physician named Michael Gray who was treating a patient with, if I remember correctly, mycotoxicity. She had moved into a moldy house and had a full body psoriasis. And there are pictures. And so Dr. Gray, I believe, was using bentonite clay and maybe charcoal at that time. Maybe it was just clay. But the long shot is that they were taking a dose once daily and the patient didn't get better. And he then asked her to take it twice daily. And there's a before and after of this patient growing hair, just like my little buddy, John Michael, the rash going away completely, all the symptoms going away. And the difference for that gal was twice daily. And so I have some patients use binders twice daily. But because my patients are so sick and there's so many things going on, I rarely ask them to do that. I see results when I give it once a day. I see them getting better. And so I don't think everybody needs to take it twice daily. I think if you have a stronger patient who's on less stuff, then you could definitely have them take binders breakfast and dinner and their supplements at lunch, their supplements, medicines. I think that's completely acceptable. And I would just divide the dose, right? So I would do 2 capsules and 2 capsules. Silicone dioxide. Okay, silicone dioxide is one of the ingredients they need to use to get the materials in the filler as opposed to silica, the binder. So those are some of the excipients. Leucine and silicone dioxide are the things that you have to need to do to get all the clay and the charcoal and the chlorella and the probiotics to play nicely together so they fit in the funnel and they can become capsulized. So, all right, let's see. How did we do? We did pretty good. That is 1 hour and 15 minutes. Are there other questions? Let's see. Oh, I'm so happy to see so many practitioners from Jill and Neil's listserv. I'm so happy to see some of my Moss Nutrition colleagues. This is wonderful, wonderful. Love it. If there are no more questions, I will wrap up the webinar. I'm available for practitioner consultations through Moss Nutrition. So you can get in touch with Moss if you'd like to set one of those up with me. I practice in New Orleans. My email is office@drmather.com. Happy to help in any other way I can for any practitioners trying to get better results for their patients. James, you snuck a question in. All right, buddy. Why use Moss, all 3 Moss probiotics? Because it works better than 2 probiotics. And 2 probiotics works better than 1. So I tend to be pretty conservative at heart. And it took me a while to get to this point because I just see so many patients, they come in, they're on 30 supplements and they're spending so much money and they're not getting better. And so I have most people take a supplement holiday before I start anything, right? And that's maybe a different lecture. So I kind of had to be dragged kicking and screaming on this one. But the long and short of it is when I first started doing functional medicine, I would just give probiotics select. And I saw it helping my patients. And after a while, I started reading more about probiotics and really figuring out the gut-brain axis and the gut-thyroid axis. And so I said, try 2. So I added Saccharomyces to the mix. My patients got better quicker. And I think it's for the reasons we discussed earlier. And it took me too long to then go to 3, right? So if like 2 is better than 1, it took me too long to go to 3, but then once I started going to 3, people got better even faster. So I'm definitely a believer that there is something to the classes of probiotics, to the lactobacillus, to the bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, Saccharomyces, and the bacillus species. There's something that they work synergistically. There's something about the dose when you get all 3. My patients got better quicker when I started doing that. And most patients get better when you get them on higher doses of probiotics and you use it twice daily. You got to tailor it to your patients, but that's the simplest answer I can give you. And this is a lot of patients that I've seen and that I've tried different things on. It just works better. So three is better than one. Hope that helped. Let's see. Any other questions? If there are no more questions, then I will call this meeting adjourned. I've got my reflex hammer. Wish you all really a good night. Please reach out if I can help you in any way. And I hope this helped you help your patients. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.